I'm author Mark Muncy,
And I'm author Erika Lance.
and this is Eerie Travels. Greetings, travelers.
Greetings, I give up. I don't know what's happening every time I say greetings, travelers.
There we go. I couldn't go on without you finishing it. So.
I literally choked on anyway, whatever. It's fine. It's fine.
It's because you're so excited, for today.
I am. I'm actually very excited because there's stuff part of what I love about a lot of these episodes is, along with our travelers that may know some more stuff than I do, I get to learn really, really cool things that I didn't know.
Yeah.
No. Oh my gosh, there was legitimate choking. But we have a breaking news, and so I want to cover that real quick.
Okay.
So at some future point, we're going to have an episode on Pinky, which is basically a Loch Ness monster kind of thing in Florida. I'm not going to give away much more than that, but a very interesting thing happened. It was published on July 17th, but basically a rare pink dolphins were spotted in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
So I'm guessing these are kind of like albino dolphins. That's what I'm going to.
What it is.
Yeah. So, but there were two of them actually.
Oh, so a pair.
So we have I'm going to link this story because somebody got it on record and stuff like that, which of course is amazing. And we love that. But they think this might be what Pinky is. So when we do our Pinky episode, we're going to have to talk about whether or not it's a rare pink dolphin.
That is a common theory, was that it was either an albino dolphin or an albino manatee, which is another creature common down here in Florida.
Yeah.
And, but it had a gray shell and some other weird things. We definitely will talk about Pinky because that was like one of our big hits from Eerie, Florida book. So we'll do a full deep dive on Pinky, but we've got a lot of lake monsters to discuss.
That's true. We do. So, but it was pretty neat that somebody actually got a video. So instead of being hyperbole, look, that's my big word of the day.
My theory is, what if Pinky is an albino alti or an albino champ? So.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We're not going down that rabbit hole right now. That's not what we're doing. Mark, don't take me down there because I'll get excited and then we won't talk about what we're going to talk about. But before we mention what we're going to talk about, I'm going to give a trigger warning to our listeners.
Yes.
We are going to talk about this episode's going to have violence and some gnarly things, including the death and stuff of children. So whether real or imagined or anything in this particular episode, if this kind of stuff bothers you, then I would suggest you jump to our next one.
Yep. And as one of our listeners pointed out to us, one of our travelers pointed out to us, said, if you're listening to a show called Eerie Travels, why do you guys keep wanting trigger warnings?
Yes, we do trigger warnings just in case. You never know what's going to trigger somebody.
But you are.
Yeah, you're listening to weird crap, so be prepared. But we get to talk about swamp witches. Because we love back hill swamp stuff. One of my favorite songs ever was the Jim Stafford song "Swamp Witch," which is talking about a witch in Okeechobee, and we'll get to Water Hattie in a minute, but let's start with the one everybody knows. Now, this isn't really a swamp witch, but she is a famous witch, and she did haunt a river or a creek. But there are so many twists in this story, so gang, buckle up. And now, when most people hear the name of this, they think about 1999, which, if you can think back that far, I know it's a long time ago for some of us. I remember. Okay, I'm going to let you go with this, but I remember when this entire thing came out. So yes, we're time traveling. Scooby-Doo.
Yep, we are talking about the Phantom Menace.
Oh God, no, we are not talking about the Phantom Menace.
That's the year this happened. That's the year this happened. That was the movie everybody was waiting on. But then there was this other movie that kind of stole its thunder a little bit. And that was a movie directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. And it was so successful that it dominated the world box office.
Well,
And
that and A Phantom Menace was terrible. So there's that too.
yeah. So
Okay.
now that movie, of course, was the Blair Witch Project. And
Whoop, whoop.
yeah. And so according to the the movie that came out, now it's kind of known now that it was bogus, right? It was
Well,
a
at that time, there was a little bit of a reveal. So I know you've got so much to tell, but my history with this is remembering seeing the previews, because when that movie was released, it was released as a documentary. It was not released as a feature film. It was released as a documentary about this team of college students that ended up disappearing. And it was footage found from their adventures.
Yep.
Yeah, looking for things, which I'm gonna let you get into all that.
There was a website, which was an early days website that you could go to, and it had, if you have information on these missing filmmakers, please contact them. Internet Movie Database, which at that point was still early days, listed the entire cast as missing, presumed deceased.
Yes, it was so well done, except for I think it was a week before the premiere, a professor or something came out and said, this isn't real, right?
Well, what happened was because of all the buildup to this, right? They do all this promotional stuff. They are actually handing out missing persons flyers at Sundance for the actors and all this to get interest in the movie. A policeman calls them from Maryland, and he's excited to look into this case. He wants to help them, and they had to tell him it was bogus, and that's where word got out. So now we're gonna go tell the backstory of Blair Witch, and there are bits of this that are real, and there are bits of this that are not, and then we'll get into our real swamp witches in a little bit. So buckle up, you're in for a ride. Just consider this our a part of spooky season. We're in that mode now. We are on the way to Halloween, and we are also on the road to Mothman. So this is perfect local lore for you. So
Yes, absolutely. So this is
all right,
exciting.
so it starts in Maryland in the Black Hills Forest, which according to local native traditions is that the tribes refuse to settle in this area. That's why there is no tribal history of the Black Hills. They, around 1630, a Colonel Nathaniel Blair leads an expedition into the forest to find a suitable place to build a fort, because that's what you did in the 1600s. You find fort places. And he sought help from a local tribe, but they sabotaged his expedition because they were like, don't build here, don't go anywhere near here. But he goes ahead and builds his fort, and they name it Blair, and Fort Blair in 1634.
Okay.
Now, different stories say that about 150 years later, so the town of Blair's off and on, never really gets that big, but in 1785, a Blair resident named Ellie Kedward, who was an Irish immigrant, was accused of practicing witchcraft by several children. And the children said she dragged them from their homes with the intention of drinking their blood. And
like you do.
the town was convinced she's terrible and they're going to kill her. And what she was telling them was, no, I'm healing them. I'm draining their blood because they've got this disease. And they don't believe it. So they tie her to a tree and lead her. Well, they tie her to a wagon and take her out of town in one of the worst winters ever. And then they tie her to a tree and banished her from the town, which is not, the usual witches at this time were generally hung, or
or
Stoned.
stoned, and of course the legend of being burned at the stake. But that did happen in a few places, but not here.
Okay, so they took her out and we're just gonna let her die to the elements.
Yeah. Now what happened is they assume she's dead after a few days, or at least eaten by the wild beasts, stuff,
Mhm.
that are in that area. And 3 of the children who accused her, accompanied by dogs, returned to the forest to see if she was dead. And
Okay,
they said she was still alive. And the boys had the dogs attack her. And then
okay.
while they beat her up with branches. And then they finally decide to hang her. Because
she just won't die. I'm just gonna throw this out there. If you are trying to kill a spooky type thing and it's not dying, let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go and just move. Do an Erika nope. Just move out of the way.
So later that year, it gets even colder. Half the village children, including those 3, just disappear. None of them are ever found, neither alive nor dead. And they just and so they leave the town. The town is cursed. We're done with this place. So they leave away. And then for 1820s, a new guy comes into the area named Henry Burkett, and he buys the abandoned town from the government, rebuilds the buildings, which were mostly in ruins, and he names it after himself, calls it Burkittsville.
Okay.
And this town does exist and is visited by many tourists every year because of the legend of the Blair Witch. Now,
which makes sense.
Somewhere in between the founding of the new town and the disappearance of the old one, there's a book that appears, a very rare book, and it is called The Blair Witch Cult, which showed up sometime in the 1800s, and it described all the events of the original town and what happened. And it is considered by many collectors to be the most valuable book on this legend at all.
Okay.
So now the new town is there, 1825. And there's this river that goes through the town, and 11 residents say that this pale hand comes out of the river and grabs a 10-year-old girl named Eileen Treacle and pulls her under the water. And this is just like inches deep creek at this point.
So a hand comes out of something, then
the creek, or this pale hand comes out of the creek and drags her in the water, and everybody runs over to find her.
They can't find her.
Can't find her anywhere. And then they're shortly after, the river is filled with all these branches that seem to be in strange tied together forms and stuff, and just filling the river, and it's just fouling the river. And they say, oh, that's probably the river's fouled because the kid probably died in it and all this. They're trying to figure it out. But then March 1886, 8-year-old Robin Weaver is reported missing in the forest, and various rescue teams go out to find her. And she said, when they do find her, she says that she met this strange old lady who was not walking, but floating. And that the lady took her hand and led her to a house. And she waited for a little time in the basement of the house and then finally left. And that's when the rescue teams found her. But what's weird is 5 of the rescue workers who went out for her never came back. And they are suddenly found on an area which is now called Coffin Rock.
Okay.
And they were tied together hand and foot and had been disemboweled, or one of our favorite words.
Oh.
And this other team finds them and goes back to town to get help, because they obviously were alive when they were bound. So this was all done to them after. And so they go to get help, but by the time they get back, the bodies are gone and are never seen again. And
Oh,
that's the rock gets
okay.
the name Coffin Rock. So now another period of years pass, and we go to 1940, November 1940, and 8 more children disappear from the town.
This is why do people keep living in this town?
And it's like every 40 years, right? It's a pattern.
Yeah. Oh,
And this, what happens to this one is the kids are missing, and finally an old man from the woods, a hermit, comes into town. His name's Rustin Parr.
mm-hmm.
And he goes into the shop in town, just looking bedraggled, and says, "I finally finished."
What?
Yeah, exactly.
I
So
don't like any of this.
they interrogate him. The police, say, what's going on? He finally leads him out to his cabin, so you'll understand everything. And they, walk 4 hours into the Black Hills, and they discover the bodies of 7 children buried in several graves located behind his house. And of course, there was evidence of violence. Some were disemboweled. They all seem to be marked with strange symbols on their hands, their chest, their ankles. And one kid survived the massacre. His name's Kyle Brody. And he was found standing in the basement corner when they got there. And Parr said that the reason he did all this was an old lady ghost was ordering him to kill the children and was telling him how to do it and how to complete the rituals. And he was quickly tried and executed ASAP.
Okay. So wait, pause. I need to catch up. Here. Just I may be the only traveler that needs to catch up, but I'm going to catch up here.
Yes.
So we have kids that are drowned. We have kids that are disemboweled. We have kids that are just missing and never to be found again. And now we have a man who shows up and goes, "Okay, I'm done." And then they leads to a ton of kids that are, don't reproduce in this area. This is a hard pass on reproduction at this point.
So we go our next, 40 some odd years, and the cycle continues. And that's when these 3 film students decide to write a documentary about the unusual happenings in this town, and they disappear. Now, as we know, that was bogus. The real secret to this is most of this story is based on real things.
So that's what makes this like, whoa, nope. Okay, just got that heebie-jeebie feeling. I don't love this. No.
There was no Blair. The town of Blair was made up. Now, this one lady was the genius behind this. Her name was Julia Farr, and she was the production, she did all the behind the scenes production of it.
Mhm.
She created the book, The Cult of the Blair Witch. So that book looks so real and is so amazing. And it's part of that website. Now, Greg Hale, who was one of the producers, he pitched the bulk of the legend to the crew because he tells them the story. And one of the production designers, Ben Rock, wrote that Hale told him the entire story, beginning with Kedward's banishment and the disappearance of the townspeople and all that other stuff. And then he waited to the end and he tells them, "Yeah, I made that whole thing up." And he's like, "I couldn't believe I've been taken in for it. I fell for that whole story." But okay, so the guys that made this film were, in Central Florida, not Maryland, right?
Yes.
And they
base it on some real things. So bloodletting, right? The witch blood being a healer.
Yeah.
They based that on Edward Kelly, who was an occultist from the 19th century, and he was able to make contact with the spirit world. He dictated in an angelic language, but he also used bloodletting as a medical practice to help heal people. So he was a spiritualist from 19th century.
Which bloodletting, that's a whole other thing, but there was a whole theory that you could purge the old and get the new, right? Like,
yep. And now that ties into an area down here in Florida, but we'll get to that after the break. But I gotta say one more thing. Rustin Parr,
yeah,
the serial killer that never existed.
yes.
He's basically Ed Gein and John Wayne Gacy, but somehow guided by an evil spirit. But what's funny about him is, if you think about the name, again, we go back to Ben Rock, who was production designer. He was really into anagrams at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Rustin Parr is Rasputin. So one of those notorious characters from history too. So
Wow. Well, what's interesting though is who they chose, because neither one of them really were child killers.
Right. Exactly.
It's interesting they base it off. I mean, because both of them are just complete.
They're combining stories and making their own mythology and their own world. And now the other filmmakers, Eduardo and Daniel, they were the real reason for this project was they were making a documentary. It was a faux documentary, which was not
which is called a mockumentary.
A mockumentary. And they were kind of going, William Castle here, we mentioned him, the House on Haunted Hill and all that, where is this a real thing? There was a teenage, it was a Cannibal Holocaust was one of his, where he did, they thought it, and then the one movie Snuff, where they thought it was an actual snuff film, to the point where when Cannibal Holocaust, they actually got put on trial and they had to have the actors show up to prove they weren't dead. But anyway, they were actually, the original intent was this was going to be bits for another documentary called Curse of Blair Witch. I believe it was actually called the Black Hills Project when they were originally working on it, because Black Hills don't exist. There's no Black Hills. This was all just faux stuff. The town of Burkittsville got swarmed with people stealing their street signs and all this, and they hate this movie. They hate people coming to visit. I think a little bit they're going, wait a minute, there is a little money here, so some of the people are embracing it, but the old timers have lived there forever. This was the worst thing that could happen to their town. And
I could say the same thing probably about Forks, not gonna lie.
About any of these places, right?
Well, I did want to touch on real quick, and I know we got to go to the break and you're going to touch on stuff, but I just want to acknowledge the magnitude of effect these filmmakers created in basically essentially creating fiction, but they did the marketing so well. If I recall, the actors were all
secluded for like 6 months. Yeah.
So that they
their own movie premiere, which is, terrifying. So
they did this in such a way, and especially at that time where it was so believable, right? They
knew it was going to do well on video. And so, because they didn't know they were going to get a wide release. This was, they made a company called Haxan Films, which is based on the original old silent Haxan movie, which was all about witchcraft. It's one of those great Criterion has an amazing release of it, but since it was semi-public domain, because the copyright had never been renewed on it, that they were using bits of their faux documentary. That was their intention. And then Artisan picked them up, and the rest is history. They got a major release, and then they had to still keep them under wraps until the video release came out.
That's so amazing and kind of funny at the same time, if you think about it. Okay, I know that we need to take a quick break here, though, correct?
Yeah, but we're gonna talk about the real stuff next.
Which just gets creepier. Creepier. Okay, travelers, here's our commercial sponsors. We'll be right back.
Erie, Appalachia. Gear up for a frightful jaunt into the darkest reaches of the ancient Appalachians. Folks deep within the Appalachian hollers lean close to the campfire to share stories of the inexplicable with hushed awe. Monsters rumbling in the hills, strange lights darting through the pitch black night sky, horrible occurrences almost ineffable in their bizarre tragedy. Tall tales, you might say. Tell that to the Flatwoods monster in Braxton County, West Virginia, or the Goat Man of Louisville. Look into his humanoid eyes and let him know you don't believe. And what of those apparitions in Mammoth Cave's Corpse Rock, or the Satan spawn known as the Jersey Devil? How do you respond when confronted by these mysteries? From the metaphysical energy that swirls near Serpent Mound in Ohio to Point Pleasant's Mothman legacy, Mark Muncy and Carrie Schultz explore the dark history lurking in the shadows of Appalachia. Read by Mark Muncy, author and experts on strange folklore with appearances on shows such as Ancient Aliens, The Curse of Robert the Doll, and many, many more.
Greetings, mortals and others. I'm Dick Terhune, the voice from hell. I work with haunted attractions all over the US, Canada, and Europe to increase audiences and enhance their experience with highly effective commercials, narrations, animatronic character voices, whatever your dark heart desires. Let me help you do more, scare more, profit more. Find out more at Voice from Hell on Facebook and at voicefromhell.com.
So we are now to what really happened, where this all starts.
What really happened? So now the movie came out. We know this, and the faux documentary they made called Curse of Blair Witch, which was kind of the original pitch.
Yeah.
And some people say, oh, this is the the budget for Blair Witch was like $3,000 or some crazy number. No, the budget was like $35,000. It wasn't a lot. But they did have a business plan. They did have all this. This was planned. But what it was planned as was this stuff where they went out in the woods and filmed for a few days was going to be bits of this other documentary about them looking for the kids. They also filmed another documentary within the documentary that was called, what was it? Mystic. Oh gosh, I can't remember. Mystic Occurrences, which was this fake 1970s looking show with this guy discussing Wicca and all the other stuff. And it's only if you do digging that you realize that that's just something they completely made up, because there's not a torrent site with 80 episodes of this missing series. Yeah, that's the only way you really know it's fake. But now the stick figures, the famous iconic imagery.
So let's talk about Blair Witch. So Clerks was made for totally off topic, but Clerks was made for a similar budget. Yep. And Clerks did amazing at the box office. So some of these little films that have smaller budgets do incredibly well at the box office. Clerks right?
Was made for about $30,000 to $100,000, and it made $30 million.
Yeah.
Blair Witch was made for $30,000 and made over $100 million. So that's
So win-win. And Blair Witch, I saw that in the theater. So there wasn't streaming services when this came out. You rented videos at the video store. Blockbuster was still a thing. Everybody come back in time with us. But this movie was terrifying the way it was filmed. It was done so incredibly well.
Yeah, they trained the actors how to use the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it is the epitome of shaky cam. That term came from this, but they also, I believe it did anyway. Somebody can correct me on that. One of our travelers.
I'm sure they will.
I'm sure somebody will. The tree branches that were sewn together in creative ways, that actually was Daniel Myrick that was one of his childhood fears growing up in Florida, was walking out in the swamps. He had a nightmare about seeing a stick figure in a tree. And so that worked into this.
Which makes sense, because there's so many scenes, and the way they film this, is, and the actors were brilliant at this, and they were all unknowns, all unknown actors, right, that
Right,
did
yeah,
this.
that was 100%.
But the way they did the filming of this, and then I'm going to let you get to the real stuff. I'm just, for travelers out there, there's a couple travel spots we can talk about that are legitimate, real things. But one of the travels you can do is watching the original Blair Witch Project movie, because it was done in such a way that it's not, it still holds up. I mean, you now know from us talking about it that it's not real, but it does hold up as a movie. It didn't have weird special effects that created it. It was done on what is hunting them, because there's no bad guy scene in this either.
It's very psychological. It is the epitome of psychological horror, and it is done so well. And there is no post-production. So there's no music, no soundtrack to let you know when it's time to be scared. And then this went on to spawn the Paranormal Activity series, which did get post-production a little bit. So that's why they started using infrasound and stuff like that to scare people. And
It's been proven with The Quiet Place, which I love those movies, that sometimes no sound, if it's done really, really well, works. Otherwise, sometimes you have to have that soundtrack. So it's layers of just epicness that they did this movie without a soundtrack. So they weren't telling you when something scary was about to happen.
And now when you watch the movie, one of my favorite bits was talking to the guys long time afterwards, was they mentioned, there's this bit at the end where they find the weird house and the big third act. Don't want to spoil it for y'all. Although I'm spoiling it by saying it's not real. But what's funny is there's these weird handprints on the wall. There's all these little children handprints on the wall. Looks creepy as hell, especially knowing the backstory. And they're in this place. And I talked to them. They said, the funnest thing ever was it was actually children of the production crew, and they all gave them hand paint and just said, go to town, have fun. And they said it was this bunch of cute little kids going, having a grand time. It's the complete opposite of the effect of, what happened.
Oh no, when travelers, if you haven't watched it, when you watch it or watch it again and hear that doesn't take away from the terrifyingness of that scene.
Now, the way they filmed it, what was really cool was they did it like a live action role-playing game, where they gave them GPSs and told them follow these rules. And then they would give them each a canister with their names on it that had their motivations for the day. And then they improv'd all their bits while they were out in the woods for 8 days. And at one point it started actually raining so bad that the GPS stopped working, because this is back in 1999. GPSs aren't nearly as advanced as they are now, but even now, sometimes they go out. This time, they wandered off and found a farmhouse and got cleaned up, had a nice shower. They were refreshed, which defeated the whole purpose of them building this. So they had to film the next day's footage. They make it all dark when you're watching it. It's all it's because that was the only post effect that they had to do, and they used this thing called After Effects, which was a new thing at the time. But anyway, they had to learn it on the go. But it's an amazing film. Definitely watch it. They're good friends that I've worked with now. That documentary, Curse of Blair Witch.
Yes.
When you watch that, it tells you the story. It tells you all this background stuff. It's amazing. It is definitely fun to watch with it. It was released separately. I think it premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel about a week before the movie got wide distribution.
Yes.
Helped build the fire. Is this real? Is this not real? I should have known something when it was on Sci-Fi Channel. But what got me was there was a familiar face on it. Now, they've been really good about casting unknowns. This guy is an unknown, his face, but his work wasn't. And there was a doctor of mythology who's teaching at this Maryland college, supposedly. And I love that they're talking about all this Maryland stuff, and they filmed it in Central Florida. And it's pretty obvious because there's palm trees in a couple of the shots. So the documentary was definitely not as keen-eyed, and definitely shows the low budget. What's fun on that is they one of the doctor was the late great Charlie Carlson, who wrote Weird Florida, and he was one of my mentors and a good friend. He is buried in Sanford. He is the master of weird on his tombstone. And he coined the I-4 dead zone. He, wrote a book that was, the grandfather of my books, Erie, Florida, and all that, that with legends and lore. And some of them he admits were things he fabricated, but some of them were real. A lot of it was real, as all real folklore. And a couple he fabricated as an FU to the Florida government, because that's the way Charlie was.
Hey, and when you mix a little bit of fake with a little bit of real, we all know that sometimes, and that's where legends come from, the boogeyman and stuff. So
this is where Blair Witch gets real.
okay, so let's talk about the real story.
Hog Island, which is this island in Brooksville,
Florida.
It is in the Withlacoochee State Forest. And in this area, there was couple early pioneer settlements. It's what happened over the years. And one of them had a problem. One of the kids in town got sick. And then 1894 and 1895, while that kid is sick, and they just cannot cure him, there is the two worst winters they've ever had in Florida. This is where we've had we actually had snow blizzards almost in Florida, Central Florida.
Wow.
I think that's the years the citrus crops all went away and everybody left Florida for a few years because it was terrible, until the railroad tycoons started sending everybody back down here because the weather's so good and it's better for your lungs and all that. But there was a lady in that town, and she was the local healer. And because she hadn't saved the kid, and because she hadn't, the two coldest winters ever, she must be a witch. So
I think that it's so interesting that they go, these are signs of bad things. These are people that are not necessarily believers in the supernatural who come up with this shit. And then they go, witch, like
1800s. This is not 1600s. This is, almost 1900s.
Yeah.
They take her out to a tree and decide to hang her. And she doesn't die quick enough for their liking. So they light her on fire. And now,
wow,
the rope snaps and she runs off into the woods on fire, never seen again. But the town that was here was called Croom.
Okay.
And it was a phosphate mine. It was a prosperous little town and all that, but it was having a rough, couple years, and it disappears within 5 years. It's gone after she's there. Now, Hog Island was named after, guess what? Feral hogs that were out there that the Spanish had brought when they first conquered Florida with their conquistadors. They brought them as a food supply, let them loose in the wild so that they would have a constant supply when they came back. And now that's why we have boars and feral hogs.
I was going to say, this is not a well thought out plan when people do stupid crap like this.
Nope,
because those creatures will literally eat anything.
Yep. And that island was just filled with them. And so that's where I got the name Hog Island. But now it is a, Withlacoochee State Forest, it is a camping site. And campers there say a lady in white. Hey, it's our lady in white again.
Our lady in white.
But this one's on fire. And she will run through the camp screaming and, ripping your tent with her claws and all this the usual scary stuff that goes on with legend.
Well, you have has anybody shown any proof of ripped up tents?
Not recently. So
okay.
She was mostly spotted in the 70s and 80s. And Charlie wrote about her in his book.
Okay.
He was telling these guys that story, and that's what inspired them. Well, partially, as along with all these other things that inspired them for Blair Witch. When some people say this was the reason for the Blair Witch Project, it's a piece. It's a piece of the reason for the Blair Witch Project. There was also another thing that happened, and this is down Lake Okeechobee. I mentioned it at the beginning. There was a song, and this song charted in the 70s,
and it was called Swamp Witch. And it was the
Okay.
#1 song, and it was done by Jim Stafford.
And I put a link to this song in the show notes.
All right. This is Jim Stafford, Swamp Witch. It is the story of Blackwater Hattie.
Okay.
Blackwater Hattie lived down in the woods where the green reptiles grow. Yeah, and it's like it's where the green reptiles roam. Yeah, and it's like it's very, very cool song. It's Jim Stafford's a master musician and a master storyteller, and this song is done like telling a story. And he talks about a town that is struggling to get by, and the fever hits it, and the doctor dies, and so they're all blaming the Blackwater Hattie who lives out in the woods, in the swamp. So they go out to
Wow.
get her, and they can't find her shack out there. And so finally they come back to town, and the town's almost done, but then there's this big vat in the town, a cauldron, if you will, filled with this bubbling brew, and the whole town, they're dying. It's a sinking ship. That's the line, and
Yeah.
they sip the brew, and suddenly the fever is gone. They're all cured. And then the rain goes away, and the sky is turned blue, and this saved the town. So they go, well, oh my gosh, Swamp Witch magic's amazing. Let's go out and thank Hattie. Let's bring her into town. She can live in town now. She doesn't have to live out in the woods. And so they get another party of men go out to find her, and they come back, and all they find is a note stabbed to a tree that says, "Don't come looking again." So
I have to say, she is one bad bitch, and I appreciate it thoroughly appreciate this
Yeah.
person, because
amazing story, and an
You know,
amazing.
and I think, one thing I was going to say, for those that are not in Florida that don't get the reference, the green reptiles are gators. Just
Yes.
let's clarify that for everybody.
Gators and
Gators.
snakes. Yeah. Yeah, the snakes
No.
hang like one of the lines in the song is the snakes hang like sausage on a smokehouse wall, which is definitely describing walking through an Okeechobee swamp. Now, Lake Okeechobee is this huge lake in the middle of Florida, and it was the start of the Everglades. They call it the River of Grass. It starts there, but we built walls around it and made it into an artificial, even bigger lake. And that's what's part of the reason why the Everglades are dying, is because we built houses around this. It was the only freshwater we had in Florida, South Florida, that we could find in the 1800s when we were settling this place. Now, when I was writing Erie, Florida,
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to that song a lot, and I was like, oh, I gotta write about her, but I couldn't find the truth on which town Blackwater Hattie was from. So when I got to do the sequel, Freaky Florida, I got to do a lot more research, had a little more time. And I actually called, because I found out like 2 towns after Erie, Florida came out and became a bestseller. I had 2 towns reach out to me and say, oh, we're where she's from. We're Blackwater Hattie's town. We're going to have a Blackwater Hattie special. And I'm like,
So wait, 2 separate towns tried to lay claim to the Swamp Witch?
yep. So I had to go to the man himself, Jim Stafford, who wrote the song, and say, okay, where did you hear this legend? And Jim still has a theater where he performs up in Branson, Missouri.
Wow.
And he still performs nightly. If you haven't seen it, it is incredible. And then I finally got in touch with him. And I said,
Okay.
hey, I wrote this book, Erie, Florida, and I want to find out about Blackwater Hattie. Where did you hear this legend? And where did you get it from? And guess what? He
What?
made it.
He made it up?
He made it all up. Blackwater Hattie was a lady who lived behind his school, who did have a shack, and he would go there and get sweet treats from her because she was a friend of his mom's. And when he'd come home from school early, he would sneak out and go to the Hattie's shack and get food from her. And at one point, people got mad at her because she was giving away candy. And so obviously she had to be a bad person. That's the closest it is to reality. But He made it up.
Oh my God. So this, okay.
So he Blair Witched before the Blair Witch.
Gosh. This is like so like fourth wall breaking. It's kind of epic.
Right.
Like, so he did a song that made up a thing that was about a made up thing that had a thing that had happened to it that other people then made up a thing, and it's so closely interwoven. But you know what's interesting, I think, about these kind of things, back to the Lady in White, is when there are certain legends that just seem like people gravitate towards them, like the same kind of legend. You know, obviously the Blair Witch, they knew it was fake, but they were pulling together certain things to create this legend that they were making up, but they did it based on fears, right? That they had, and then did it in a very clever way. And the cool thing about what they did, in a way, is nobody can do that again. Like,
no ever be able. That was the perfect storm at the perfect time. Because that was before, things like Snopes and other things. Although Snopes is not always the be all end all gang. They've been debunked themselves a few times. But things like that, you can easily Google and internet check these things now. Back then, websites didn't link to other websites very much. I think web crawler was the first thing to start doing that, or Ask Jeeves were the first things to start being able to do that. You had to know the links to go to. And BlairWitch.com was still up until recently. I think they closed it right before the 2016 movie. I think they right after that they switched it because that was a remake of a remake. The later movies, what's funny is all the original filmmakers had nothing to do with the sequels or the remakes, because they said, like, if we screw this up, we wanted somebody else to screw it up. We don't want it to be us. So they all moved on.
And that movie did way better. I mean, when you're given that much, not that they made every single cent of that, but they all became pretty loaded from making these movies. And from what I understand, they shared it with the cast and crew.
They did. They did, because of all the weirdness and everything that they had. They put them through, where they basically sent them through a live action role playing game for 8 days, and only given them the basics in the original audition. Now everybody's like, oh, they tortured the cast. They knew what they were getting into a little bit. The description for the ad said what they were going to be doing. It was going to involve woods filming and stuff, and improvising a whole feature film. So they knew what they were getting into. And what was fun was they peppered the town. They hired the local community theater actors in the town to give them pieces of the story, and they only stumbled on 2 of them. But thankfully they had the gist of it. But there were a couple bits that they had missed, like the guy standing in the corner, the kid standing in the corner, and all that. So they had to film a few bits after they got back home, and that's why they're filmed like angled to the sky, so you can't see that they're not filming in Maryland. They're filming in Florida, stuff like that. It's really fun to hear the whole stories behind this. Now, sadly, one of the filmmakers did pass away from a skiing accident, right after the movie really hit big. So, but a couple of the others are still, making movies and stuff. There was a recent one called Skyman that Mirnick did that was really good. So
very cool. Okay. Well, with all this terrifyingness, let's talk about where we can travel.
All right. So I would recommend Hog Island, which is Brooksville, and you can go spend a night in the camp out there. I would not do it until the 9 months of Florida summer are over. So I would say right after Halloween is a good time.
Well, I would
November's
say
still a little warm, but at least
I would say January, February, March. That's what I'm going to recommend.
March are your best bets. January, February are the best bets, because then you're not dodging hurricanes and you're still getting away from the cold everywhere else and still having a nice time down there.
Yeah.
Although there are 3 random days of winter that can occur, and you could have another blizzard like 1894, 1895. But
okay, don't hold your breath. We're not even going to get into global warming, but how many cool days did you guys have this year?
Oh man, we actually had a kind of a cool March, which was never happens. So that was a scary. That's why we knew we were in for a rough summer. So, but we didn't have any cold days this year. Which last year we had like a dozen cold days, which was weird for us. So
Yeah, I just want to also point out cold is very relative.
that's true. That's true. Well, cold for us was like in the 60s, which is, that's crazy. That's down here in Florida. It gets in the 60s. Everybody's got to put on parkas. But it got down into the 30s and 40s a couple times. So
Yes, but for a lot of people, 30s and 40s is still not that cold.
oh,
So
that's jeans and short. That's shorts weather for me from Ohio. But yeah,
exactly. So okay, so travel, they can go to Hog Island, they can go
Hog Island,
camping.
and that's right near Brooksville. We did that whole episode on Brooksville.
Yeah.
That you can see the May Stringer House. You go to Coney Island hot dogs. All that is right there. The Florida National Cemetery is right there. Cow Prairie Cemetery we talked about. That's all right there. So it's an amazing place to visit. Other place, you can go to Burkittsville. They do have Blair Witch tours. Now they're starting to finally embrace it now that the madness is over. But again, just not everybody's in on it, and a lot of people aren't happy about it. But if you go to the right places and check in, there's places that'll take you to. They even walk you out to the old house it is an abandoned site, but it is accessible. So and just
Very
make sure
cool.
you check the GPS before you go.
So, but don't forget to watch the movies and look at the documentaries and stuff if you decide to embark on any of this. And if you happen to see a woman in white on fire, which is like a leveled up woman on white.
Yeah, see, I still think it's just the lady in white. I think the on fire is, again, people just assume witches had to have been burned at the stake. I do believe a lady was hung there, and that's the other scary thing, is there are lots of reports of lynchings in that area around that time. And this ghost story might be a way to cover up some dark thing that really happened. I was never able to get any concrete evidence of that, but I think that might be what happened.
Well, and we know those kind of things happen in that area because we've already covered that.
Yeah, Brooksville,
Yeah,
it has some history. So
yes, it does. But travelers, would love to hear your stories about swamp witches and legends and things like that. I think that would be so much fun. Don't forget to send us listener tales. You can go to our site. We're doing lots of site revamps. So there'll be lots of cool stuff, including our shop and things like that as things are progressing here. So you can get all of the cool things from there.
Get some merch and then come see us at some of the events coming up. We've got Mothman Festival in September. We've got was Indianapolis. We got
you're gonna be at PopCon. I won't, because I'm going to be in Ireland chasing Irish ghosts.
Oh yeah.
But you'll get some updates from me. And then we will be at Scarefest in October, I think it is.
I'll be at Spookala, and then we'll be at Scarefest. We'll be at BartoCon. I'll be speaking at the St. Pete Museum of History October 12th, and BartoCon October 14th. So Friday the 13th in October, we may have a surprise. So we'll see.
Yes, no, we're definitely gonna have Friday the 13th. We're having a surprise.
It has the listing. Our Facebook has all the listings, all the socials, and please give us a like, a share, a subscribe, and follow us on our Eerie Travels, gang. Oh my gosh. But Erika, stay safe, beware of the witch, and we'll see you on the other side.